The shadow of the bear. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays that filtered through the towering pines of the Cascade Mountains. Two friends, Sarah and Jake, were on a much-anticipated hiking trip, eager to escape the chaos of city life. They had meticulously planned their adventure, studying maps and packing supplies for their weekend in the wilderness. As they parked their car at the trailhead, excitement bubbled within them. The air was crisp and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and earth. They laced up their hiking boots, slung their backpacks over their shoulders, and set off down the narrow path, their laughter echoing through the trees. "Can you believe we finally made it?" Sarah exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "This is going to be amazing." Jake nodded, a wide grin on his face. "I can't wait to reach the summit and take in the view. Just us and nature." The trail wound deeper into the forest, with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves surrounding them. They chatted about their lives, reminiscing about college days and sharing dreams for the future. The further they hiked, the more they felt disconnected from civilization, embracing the tranquility of the wilderness. As they reached a clearing, the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ground. They decided to set up camp for the night, choosing a flat spot near a bubbling creek. Jake gathered firewood while Sarah pitched the tent, their teamwork seamless and efficient. Once the campfire crackled to life, they cooked a simple meal of hot dogs and baked beans, sharing stories and laughter under the starlit sky. The warmth of the fire contrasted with the cool night air, creating a cozy atmosphere. However, as the night wore on, an unsettling feeling crept into Sarah's mind. "Do you ever think about what's out here with us?" she asked, glancing into the dark woods surrounding them. Jake chuckled, dismissing her concerns. "It's just us and the critters. Besides, we're in a national park. They're more afraid of us than we are of them." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She shrugged it off, attributing it to the stories she had heard about bears in the wilderness. After a few more jokes and a couple of marshmallows roasted over the fire, they crawled into their tent, exhaustion overtaking them. As they settled into their sleeping bags, the sounds of the forest enveloped them. The rustling of leaves and distant hoots of owls lulled them into a peaceful sleep. However, in the stillness of the night, a low growl echoed through the trees, sending chills down Sarah's spine. Morning light filtered through the tent, and Sarah awoke with a start. She rubbed her eyes and glanced at Jake, who was still asleep. The events of the previous night felt like a distant memory, but the lingering unease remained. After a quick breakfast, they packed up their campsite and continued their hike, eager to explore the trails that led to the summit. The path was steep and rocky, but their spirits were high as they navigated the terrain, the beauty of nature surrounding them. As they reached a scenic overlook, they paused to catch their breath and take in the breathtaking view of the valley below. The vast expanse of trees stretched out like a green sea, and the distant mountains loomed majestically in the background. "Wow, this is incredible," Jake exclaimed, snapping photos with his camera. "We need to come back here every year." Just then, a group of hikers approached from the opposite direction. They looked weary, their faces etched with concern. One of the hikers, a tall man with a scruffy beard, stopped to speak with them. "Hey, you two should be careful out here," he warned, his voice serious. "There's been talk of a bear in the area. It's been aggressive, and a few people have reported close encounters." Sarah's heart raced at the mention of the bear. "What do you mean aggressive?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man shook his head. "Just be cautious. Keep your food stored properly, and make noise while you hike. Bears don't typically attack, but if they feel threatened or cornered, it can turn dangerous." Jake laughed off the warning, but Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. They thanked the man and continued on their way, but the fear of the bear lingered in the back of her mind. As they hiked, Sarah noticed the forest growing quieter. The usual sounds of birds and insects seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. "Do you feel that?" Sarah asked, glancing at Jake. It's too quiet. Jake shrugged, trying to remain optimistic. It's probably just the time of day. Let's keep moving. They pressed on, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The trees loomed overhead, their branches swaying gently in the wind, and shadows danced around them. It was a beautiful day, yet an unsettling tension hung in the air. As they rounded a bend in the trail, they stumbled upon a clearing littered with claw marks on the trees and tufts of fur caught on the branches. Sarah's heart raced as she examined the signs. "Jake, look at this," she said, pointing to the marks. "This can't be good." He stepped closer, his expression shifting from amusement to concern. "Yeah, that's definitely a bear's work. We should keep moving." The two hurried down the trail, the thrill of adventure replaced by a growing sense of dread. The warnings they had brushed off earlier now felt all too real. They needed to be cautious, but the thrill of the hike pushed them forward. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the landscape, Sarah and Jake decided to set up camp once again. They found a clearing near a babbling brook, the sound of water soothing their frayed nerves. After a quick meal, they gathered around the fire, hoping to shake off the tension of the day. "Let's just enjoy the night," Jake said, attempting to lighten the mood. "Tomorrow we'll reach the summit, and it will all be worth it." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The forest felt alive, and not in the comforting way she had imagined. Shadows crept between the trees, and the whispers of the wind carried a sense of foreboding. As darkness enveloped the camp, they settled into their tent, the warmth of the fire fading outside. Sarah lay awake, her mind racing with thoughts of the bear. Just as she began to drift off, a loud crash echoed through the woods, jolting her awake. "What was that?" she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. Jake stirred beside her, groggy and confused. "Probably just a branch falling. Go back to sleep." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She listened intently, her breath catching in her throat as the sounds of the forest shifted. It was as if the woods had come alive, the rustling leaves and distant howls growing louder. Suddenly, a deep growl reverberated through the darkness, sending chills down her spine. "Jake, did you hear that?" she whispered urgently. Before he could respond, the tent shook violently, and they heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Panic surged through Sarah as she scrambled to unzip the tent, her heart racing. "Stay inside," Jake hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. But it was too late. The tent flaps burst open, and a massive shape loomed before them, a bear, its eyes glinting in the dim light. It was enormous, its fur matted and dirty, and its teeth bared in a snarl. The creature stood on its hind legs, towering over them, and Sarah felt a wave of terror wash over her. "Run!" Jake shouted, shoving Sarah out of the tent. They bolted into the darkness, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they sprinted away from the campsite. The bear let out a deafening roar, chasing after them with terrifying speed. They dashed through the trees, branches clawing at their arms and legs, the underbrush tearing at their clothes. Sarah's heart raced as she glanced back, the bear close behind, its growls echoing in the night. "Where do we go?" Sarah yelled, panic rising in her throat. "Head for the creek," Jake shouted, pointing to the sound of rushing water in the distance. "We can lose it there." They veered toward the creek, the sound of water growing louder as they ran. The ground beneath them became uneven, and they stumbled over roots and rocks, their lungs burning with exertion. Just as they reached the water's edge, Sarah felt a sharp pain in her ankle as she twisted it on a hidden stone. "Keep going," Jake urged, glancing back at the bear, which was gaining on them. "We can't stop." With every ounce of strength, Sarah pushed through the pain, wading into the icy water. The bear paused at the edge, its massive body silhouetted against the moonlight. It let out a frustrated growl, pacing back and forth, unwilling to follow them into the water. "Now what?" Sarah gasped, shivering from the cold. "We need to find a way to cross," Jake said, scanning the surroundings. "There has to be a way out of here." They searched for a shallow spot to cross, but the current was strong, and the water was freezing. The bear continued to roar from the shore, its frustration evident as it circled the bank. "Let's climb a tree," Sarah suggested, her eyes darting around for a suitable one. Jake nodded, and they scrambled up the nearest tree, their hearts racing as they climbed higher. The branches creaked under their weight, and they settled on a sturdy limb, trying to catch their breath. As they sat in the tree, the bear continued to pace below, its growls echoing through the night. Sarah held onto the branch tightly, her heart pounding in her chest. They were safe for now, but the fear of what would happen next loomed over them. Hours passed as they clung to the tree, the bear's growls echoing in the darkness. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the forest. Sarah's ankle throbbed painfully and exhaustion washed over her. "Do you think it will leave?" she whispered, glancing down at the bear, which had settled near the base of the tree, its eyes watching them intently. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice strained. "We need to wait until it's gone before we try to make a run for it." As the night wore on, the bear remained vigilant, occasionally growling or pawing at the ground. Sarah and Jake exchanged worried glances, their hearts heavy with fear. They were trapped, and the realization sank in like a stone in their stomachs. "Do you think anyone is looking for us?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Probably," Jake replied, trying to sound reassuring. "We just need to hold on until morning. We can find a way back then." But as the hours dragged on, the fatigue and fear began to take their toll. Sarah felt her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of the day weighing her down. Just as she began to drift off, a loud crash echoed through the forest, jolting her awake. The bear had stood up on its hind legs again, sniffing the air as if it could sense their fear. Sarah's heart raced as she gripped the branch, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen if they fell. "Stay awake," Jake urged, his eyes wide with fear. "We can't let it catch us off guard." They spent the rest of the night in silence, the tension thick in the air. The forest felt alive, the sounds of night creatures echoing around them, but the bear remained a constant presence, a dark shadow lurking below. As dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight pierced through the trees, illuminating the forest in a warm glow. The bear, sensing the change, finally turned away from the tree and lumbered off into the woods, leaving Sarah and Jake trembling in its wake. "We need to get down," Jake said, relief flooding his voice. "It's gone." Carefully they climbed down from the tree, their limbs stiff and sore from the night spent clinging to the branches. The forest was quiet now, the only sounds the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. "Let's get back to camp and gather our things," Sarah said, her voice shaky but determined. "We need to leave this place." They made their way back to the campsite, the fear of the bear still fresh in their minds. As they approached, they found their tent torn apart and their supplies scattered across the ground. The bear had ransacked their camp, leaving destruction in its wake. "Great, just great," Jake muttered, surveying the damage. "We need to find a way out of here." They quickly gathered what they could salvage, their hearts racing as they scanned the woods for any sign of the bear. The fear of being caught again loomed over them, pushing them to move faster. "Let's head back to the trail and find a way to the ranger station," Sarah suggested, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. They set off down the trail, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The forest felt different now, the beauty of nature overshadowed by the threat of the bear. Every rustle of leaves made them jump, every shadow seemed to loom larger. As they hiked, the sun climbed higher in the sky, but the sense of dread never left them. They pushed on, determined to reach safety, but the fear of the bear haunted their every step. Hours passed as they hiked, their legs aching and their spirits low. The trail seemed endless, winding deeper into the woods, and the fear of the bear lingered in the back of their minds. "Do you think we're far enough away?" Jake asked, glancing back nervously. "I hope so," Sarah replied, her heart racing. "But we can't let our guard down." As they rounded a bend in the trail, they stumbled upon a small cabin nestled among the trees. It looked abandoned, the windows boarded up and the door hanging loosely on its hinges. "Maybe we can find shelter in there," Jake suggested, his eyes lighting up with hope. They approached the cabin cautiously, their hearts pounding in their chests. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a dusty interior filled with cobwebs and forgotten memories. "Hello?" Jake called out, his voice echoing in the silence. "Is anyone here?" No answer came, and the cabin felt eerily empty. They stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. Sarah felt a sense of unease wash over her as she glanced around, the shadows in the corners seeming to shift. "Let's search for supplies," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here long." They rummaged through the cabin, finding old blankets, canned food, and a few tools. It wasn't much, but it would help them survive until they could find a way out. As they gathered their supplies, a sudden noise outside made them freeze. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her heart racing. Jake nodded, his expression serious. "It sounded like something's out there." They moved to the window, peering through the dusty glass. The forest was quiet, but a sense of dread filled the air. Just as they turned away, a loud crash echoed through the trees, followed by a deep growl that sent chills down their spines. "It's the bear!" Sarah gasped, her eyes wide with fear. They quickly barricaded the door with furniture, their hearts pounding in their chests. The growling grew louder, and they could hear the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the cabin. "What do we do?" Jake asked, panic rising in his voice. "Stay quiet," Sarah whispered, her mind racing. "We can't let it know we're here." They huddled together in the corner of the cabin, their breaths shallow as they listened to the bear's growls outside. The creature circled the cabin, scratching at the walls and sniffing around the door. The sound of claws scraping against wood sent waves of terror coursing through them. Suddenly, the door shuddered violently as the bear slammed into it, the force nearly knocking them off their feet. They clung to each other, fear gripping their hearts as the bear continued to attack the door, its growls echoing in the small space. "Jake, we need to find a way out," Sarah cried, her voice trembling. "Through the back window," Jake shouted, pointing to the small window at the rear of the cabin. "We can escape that way." They dashed toward the window, adrenaline pumping through their veins. Jake pushed the window open, and they scrambled through, landing hard on the ground outside. The bear's growls filled the air, and they didn't look back as they sprinted into the forest. The trees blurred past them as they ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. They could hear the bear crashing through the underbrush behind them, its growls filled with fury. They had to find a way to lose it. "Head for the creek," Sarah shouted, remembering the sound of water from before. They veered toward the sound, their lungs burning as they sprinted through the trees. The bear was gaining on them, its heavy footsteps echoing in the silence of the forest. Just as they reached the creek, they skidded to a halt, the icy water rushing past them. "Jump in!" Jake yelled, and without hesitation, they leaped into the frigid water. The current pulled them downstream, and they fought against the cold, desperate to escape the bear. They could hear it roaring in frustration from the bank, but they were too far away now. They swam as hard as they could, the adrenaline pushing them forward. As they emerged on the opposite bank, gasping for breath, they crawled onto the shore, shivering from the cold. They looked back at the creek, the bear standing at the edge, its eyes filled with rage. "We need to keep moving," Sarah urged, her voice trembling. "It won't give up." They stumbled to their feet and continued down the trail, the fear of the bear driving them forward. They knew they had to find safety, but the forest felt like a maze, and every shadow seemed to hold a threat. As they hiked deeper into the woods, the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the landscape. The shadows grew longer, and the forest felt more ominous than ever. They were exhausted, their bodies aching from the day's events, but they couldn't stop now. "We need to find a place to hide," Jake said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "It could be anywhere." They stumbled upon a rocky outcropping, the perfect place to take cover. They squeezed into a small crevice, hoping it would provide some protection from the bear. As they settled in, they listened intently for any signs of danger. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, but the fear of the bear lingered in the back of their minds. They huddled together, their hearts racing as they waited for the night to fall. As darkness enveloped the forest, the sounds of the night shifted. The chirping of crickets filled the air, but the ominous silence that followed made their hearts race. They could hear distant growls echoing through the trees, sending chills down their spines. "Do you think it's still out there?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Jake replied, his eyes scanning the darkness. "We need to be ready for anything." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the woods, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching. The bear was close, and they could feel the ground tremble beneath them. "Stay quiet," Jake urged, his voice barely above a whisper. They held their breath, listening as the bear drew nearer. The growls grew louder, and they could see the silhouette of the massive creature moving through the trees. It was searching for them, its instincts guiding it toward their hiding spot. As the bear approached, Sarah's heart raced. She could see its massive form silhouetted against the moonlight, its eyes glinting with hunger. She felt a surge of fear, realizing they were trapped. "We can't stay here," she whispered urgently. "We have to do something." Jake nodded, his mind racing. "If we can distract it, maybe we can make a run for it." "Do you have any ideas?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Let's use the supplies we have left," Jake said, rummaging through their packs. He pulled out a flashlight and a whistle. "We can create noise and light to distract it." As the bear drew closer, Jake prepared to execute his plan. He turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the bear, and blew the whistle with all his might. The sound echoed through the night, piercing the silence. The bear paused, its attention drawn to the noise. It growled in confusion, its massive head turning toward the light. Taking advantage of the distraction, Jake grabbed Sarah's hand. "Now! Let's go!" he shouted, pulling her out of the crevice and sprinting away from the bear. They dashed through the trees, adrenaline fueling their escape. The bear roared in frustration, crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. They could hear its heavy footsteps behind them, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. "Keep running," Sarah yelled, her heart pounding in her chest. They raced through the forest, the trees blurring past them as they pushed themselves to the limit. Just as they thought they were gaining distance, they heard the bear's growls growing louder, its rage propelling it forward. "Over there!" Jake shouted, pointing to a rocky ledge. "We can climb up." They scrambled up the rocks, their fingers scraping against the rough surface as they pulled themselves to safety. The bear reached the base of the ledge, its massive form towering below them. "Stay back!" Jake shouted, waving the flashlight in the bear's direction. The creature growled, its eyes filled with fury as it paced beneath them. Sarah felt a surge of desperation. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We need to find a way to distract it again," Jake replied, scanning the area for anything they could use. As they searched, Sarah noticed a pile of rocks nearby. "What if we throw these?" she suggested. "It might give us enough time to escape." Jake nodded, grabbing a handful of rocks. They began to hurl them down at the bear, the stones bouncing off the ground and startling the creature. The bear growled in response, its attention momentarily diverted. "Now's our chance," Jake yelled, and they scrambled down the ledge, sprinting away from the bear once more. They ran through the forest, their hearts pounding as they searched for a way out. The fear of the bear pushed them forward, and they could hear its growls echoing behind them. Just when they thought they might escape, the bear let out a deafening roar, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "Keep going!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with determination. They stumbled upon a narrow path that led them deeper into the woods. The sounds of the bear faded as they pressed on, hope igniting within them. They could feel the air changing, the scent of pine and earth filling their lungs as they moved. Finally, they emerged from the trees, finding themselves at the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast valley. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. "We made it," Jake gasped, collapsing to the ground. But their relief was short-lived. From the shadows of the trees, the bear emerged, its eyes locked onto them. It was relentless, its growls echoing through the valley as it approached. "Jake, we have to jump!" Sarah shouted, her voice filled with panic. Before they could react, the bear lunged at them, its massive body crashing into the ground. They had no choice. With a final glance at each other, they jumped off the cliff, plunging into the unknown. As they fell, time seemed to slow. The fear, the adrenaline, and the thrill of the jump intertwined, and for a brief moment, they felt free. But as they hit the water below, the cold engulfed them, and darkness surrounded them.